What happens when a young black teenager is wrongly accused and the entire courtroom laughs at her? What if, in that moment, she turned everything around, exposing a justice system built on bias? Zoe Martin did just that, by outsmarting the prosecution, revealing hidden truths, and making the judge question everything he thought he knew. Stay with us to see how one teen took on the system. And won. Before we dive into this moving story, take a moment to comment below where you're watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will stay with you long after they're told. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Los Angeles County Courthouse was a place where lives were decided, where judgments were made, and where the law was supposed to serve justice. But on this particular morning, as the courtroom filled with spectators, there was a strange tension hanging in the air. It wasn't the usual quiet anticipation before a trial. It was something different, something a little heavier. The sound of low murmurs, the shuffle of papers, and the clink of pens all seemed to add to a feeling of impending action. In the center of it all sat Judge Marcus Grayson, a man whose reputation was well known in legal circles. He wasn't the kind of judge who took time to warm up to his cases. No, Judge Grayson was known for his quick decisions, his cold precision, and his sharp tongue. He had little patience for defendants who didn't seem to understand the seriousness of the situation they were in. And that's exactly what he saw today when he looked at Zoe Martin, a teenager who in his mind was far too young and inexperienced to be standing in front of him in a courtroom. Grayson glanced over the list of names before him. He read off the charges: grand larceny for allegedly stealing a rare and valuable piece of artwork. The description of the crime seemed straightforward enough. At least that's what he assumed. It was just another day in the courtroom for Grayson, handling yet another simple case. Or so he thought. But then his gaze fell on Zoe. She stood in front of him, calm and poised, with a demeanor that didn't quite fit the situation. Most people who found themselves in court for a crime like this would be fidgeting, nervous, maybe even shaking. But Zoe was different. She stood tall, her back straight, eyes focused. There was a quiet confidence in her stance that caught Grayson's attention, though he tried not to show it. At 18, Zoe's face was still youthful, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she had seen more than most people her age. She wasn't looking around the room nervously. She wasn't trying to hide in the corner. She wasn't a girl lost in a system too big for her. No, she was standing there as though she belonged, and to Grayson, that was already a problem. "Zoe Martin," Judge Grayson called, his voice cutting through the low murmur in the room. "Yes, Your Honor," Zoe replied, her voice clear and steady. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood of his desk. He studied Zoe for a moment, sizing her up, trying to read her. He wasn't impressed. She looked like just another teenager in over her head, caught up in something she didn't understand. He couldn't help but let a smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. "You do realize where you are, don't you? This isn't a school debate, Ms. Martin. You're facing serious charges here. A rare artwork gone missing, allegedly in your possession, and yet you look like you could be heading to a college class, not standing in front of a judge." His words were cold, dismissive. He wasn't expecting her to answer, he was just making a point, trying to see if her confidence would crack under the pressure. But Zoe didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, her chin held high. There was no fear in her eyes, just calm determination. "I understand, Your Honor," she replied, her voice firm but respectful. Grayson raised an eyebrow, surprised by her composed response. It was rare to see someone so self-assured at this stage in the trial, especially someone so young. Most people were either trembling or too busy trying to explain themselves to notice the nuances of the case. But Zoe wasn't like them. She was already thinking ahead, her mind sharp and alert. He couldn't resist. "You don't need to look so confident, Ms. Martin. This isn't going to be a game of pretending you know the law. I suggest you save your energy for something more useful." Zoe didn't react. Her hands remained clasped in front of her, calm and steady. There was a slight rustle from the gallery as the spectators waited for the next move. Some were skeptical, others just curious. They could sense it, the uncertainty that Grayson's mockery had planted. People were already making assumptions about Zoe. A teenager, a girl who didn't belong here. The kind of case the judge would wrap up with ease. The spectators had already decided, and so had Grayson. He could already see the outcome in his mind. But there was something about Zoe that kept him interested, something he couldn't quite place. He pushed it aside, thinking it was just his usual impatience. He wasn't going to waste any more time on her. This was just a simple case, A minor interruption in his schedule. You're charged with stealing a rare painting, Miss Martin. The prosecution has evidence. Your fingerprints were found on the item. You were caught with the stolen property in your possession. This is a clear case, Grayson said, leaning forward, his hands clasped in front of him. As he spoke, the gallery quietly buzzed. The prosecutor, Mitchell Lawson, looked over at Zoe with a knowing glance. His expression suggested he'd already won. His job was just to play his part and wait for the conviction. This was as good as done, or so he thought. But Zoe didn't seem to hear the weight of the accusations. Her face didn't change. There was no reaction to the claim that her fingerprints were on the stolen painting. No sign of regret, no plea of innocence. She simply stood there, waiting. Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly. He watched her for another moment, trying to figure out what she was up to. Maybe she was hiding her fear, or maybe she was just stubborn. Either way, he wasn't going to waste any more time. The evidence was clear, and this case was going to be quick. "Let's just get this over with," Grayson muttered under his breath, flipping through the case file. His words weren't meant for Zoe, but she heard them. The way they dropped from his lips, as if she didn't matter, as if her life didn't matter. For some reason, that only strengthened Zoe's resolve. This wasn't going to be like all the other cases. She wasn't just another teenager in a courtroom. She had studied law for years, thanks to the guidance of her mother, a paralegal who had worked with attorneys her whole life. Zoe knew the ins and outs of the legal system. She knew the game better than anyone in that room. The people in the gallery didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something they hadn't expected. With a slight shift in her posture, Zoe prepared herself for what came next. This wasn't a courtroom for her. It was a stage, and she was about to show them how it was done. "Miss Martin," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "do you even know what you're doing here? Are you sure you want to play lawyer?" His words hung in the air, heavy with judgment. The courtroom fell silent, the spectators sensing the tension, waiting for Zoe's response. Zoe stood tall, her posture unwavering. She met Grayson's gaze with a calmness that belied her years. "I'm not here to waste anyone's time, Your Honor. I'm here to represent myself." Her words were clear, firm, and carried a weight that surprised even the seasoned prosecutor, Raymond Douglas. A subtle chuckle escaped his lips, a sound that was quickly stifled by the gravity of the moment. The room was still, the silence profound. The gallery exchanged glances, whispers rippling through the crowd. Grayson, taken aback by her audacity, leaned forward, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. "You think you can handle this on your own? This isn't a game, Miss Martin. This is real life, and you're in over your head." Zoe's eyes never wavered. "I understand the seriousness of the charges, Your Honor, and I believe I am capable of representing myself." Her voice was steady, unwavering. Grayson scoffed, shaking his head. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. He turned to the prosecutor, Raymond Douglas, who was still recovering from his initial surprise. "Proceed," Grayson commanded, signaling the start of the proceedings. As Raymond stood to present the case, Zoe remained seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was acutely aware of the eyes upon her, the skeptical glances, the raised eyebrows, the whispers. But she remained unfazed. This was her moment, and she was determined to make it count. Raymond began outlining the charges against Zoe, detailing the evidence that had been gathered. He spoke of the stolen artwork, the fingerprints found on the scene, the surveillance footage that seemed to implicate her. Each word he spoke painted a picture of guilt, a narrative that seemed irrefutable. The gallery listened intently, nodding in agreement, the weight of the evidence settling over them. Zoe listened carefully, her mind processing each detail. She had anticipated these points, had prepared for them. She knew the prosecution's case inside and out. But she also knew that appearances could be deceiving. The truth was often more complex than it seemed. As Raymond concluded his presentation, he turned to Zoe. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence is clear. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the stolen artwork. She was seen on surveillance footage near the scene. The case is straightforward." Grayson nodded, his expression one of approval. "It seems so," he said, turning to Zoe. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Zoe stood up, her movements deliberate. She faced the judge, her expression calm but resolute. "Yes, Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "I would like to request that the court dismiss the charges against me due to lack of evidence." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made the room fall silent. Grayson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her request. Dismiss the charges? On what grounds? He asked, his tone skeptical. Zoe took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Your Honor, she began, the prosecution has presented evidence that is circumstantial at best. The fingerprints found on the scene could have been left there at any time. The surveillance footage is unclear and doesn't definitively place me at the scene. There is no concrete evidence linking me to the crime. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Therefore, I respectfully request that the charges be dismissed. The courtroom was silent, the spectators holding their breath. Grayson sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. He studied Zoe for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. Your request is noted, he said, his voice neutral. The court will deliberate and render a decision. As the judge called for a recess, Zoe returned to her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had taken the first step, but the road ahead was uncertain. She knew the challenges she would face, the obstacles that would be placed in her path. But she was ready. She had to be. The gallery buzzed with conversation as the recess began. Whispers filled the room, discussions about Zoe's audacity, her confidence, her apparent naivety. Some were impressed by her boldness, others were skeptical, doubting her ability to navigate the complexities of the legal system. But all were intrigued. Zoe had captured their attention, and they were eager to see what she would do next. As the recess continued, Zoe sat quietly, her mind racing. She reviewed the prosecution's arguments, analyzing each point, each piece of evidence. She knew she had to be prepared for whatever came next. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. After what felt like an eternity, the court reconvened. Grayson returned to the bench, his expression serious. The court has considered the defendant's request for dismissal, he began. After careful deliberation, the motion is denied. The trial will proceed. Zoe nodded, accepting the decision. She had expected this outcome. The real challenge was just beginning. She stood up, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was watching, waiting, and Zoe was prepared to show them that she was more than just a naive teenager. She was a force to be reckoned with. Your Honor, I respectfully request to cross-examine the witness, Zoe began. I believe there are inconsistencies in the testimony that need to be addressed. Judge Grayson, taken aback by her composure, nodded. Proceed, he said, his tone less dismissive than before. In the gallery, a woman named Jackie Morrison watched intently. A close family friend and private investigator, Jackie had recognized Zoe's natural legal aptitude early on. She had been instrumental in helping Zoe study law, providing guidance and resources. Jackie's subtle role in Zoe's preparation was crucial, though she remained a quiet observer in the courtroom. Zoe approached the witness stand, her demeanor calm yet assertive. She began by questioning the art gallery employee about the lighting conditions on the night in question. Can you confirm the lighting was adequate for clear identification? Zoe inquired. The witness hesitated. Well, it was dim, but I could make out the figure, he replied. Zoe pressed further. Isn't it possible that the dim lighting could have affected your ability to identify the individual accurately? The witness faltered. I suppose it could have, he admitted. Turning to the jury, Zoe continued. If the lighting was insufficient, how reliable is the identification? She then shifted her focus to the surveillance footage. The video shows a figure attempting to steal the artwork. However, can you confirm that the footage hasn't been altered or tampered with? The prosecutor objected, but Judge Grayson overruled, allowing Zoe to proceed. The witness admitted he couldn't verify the authenticity of the footage. Zoe concluded, without clear evidence of the video's integrity, can we truly rely on it to identify the thief? The courtroom was silent, the weight of her questions hanging in the air. Zoe had not only challenged the evidence, but had also cast doubt on its credibility. Zoe's unexpected legal acumen had turned the tide. Her ability to dissect the prosecution's case and expose its weaknesses left the courtroom in stunned silence. Judge Grayson, once dismissive, now regarded her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The jury, too, was visibly affected, their expressions reflecting the doubt Zoe had instilled. As the session adjourned, Zoe returned to her seat, her mind already racing ahead, formulating her next move. She knew the battle was far from over, but today she had taken a significant step toward justice. The courtroom was charged with tension. Zoe Martin, having already challenged the prosecution's evidence, stood poised for the next phase of her self-representation. Judge Marcus Grayson, his skepticism evident, prepared to hear the defense's response. Zoe began by requesting access to the full surveillance footage. Your Honor, she addressed Judge Grayson, "I respectfully request to view the complete surveillance footage from the night in question. The excerpts presented so far lack context and may not accurately represent the events." Judge Grayson, though skeptical, nodded. "Proceed," he said, his tone begrudgingly conceding to her request. As the full footage played, Zoe observed the timestamps and video quality. She noted discrepancies, such as inconsistent lighting and potential tampering. "Your Honor," she interjected, "the timestamps on this footage appear inconsistent. Additionally, the video quality fluctuates, suggesting possible tampering," the courtroom murmured. The prosecution, caught off guard, attempted to dismiss her observations. However, Zoe's meticulous attention to detail had planted seeds of doubt. Next, Zoe turned her attention to the officer who had handled the evidence. "Officer," she began, "can you confirm that the storage logs for the stolen artwork were checked upon its retrieval?" The officer hesitated. I didn't personally check the logs," he admitted. Zoe pressed on. "Without verifying the storage logs, how can we be certain that the evidence presented is the same as the one retrieved from storage?" The officer faltered. "I suppose we can't be entirely sure," he conceded. This admission was a significant blow to the prosecution's case. The chain of custody, essential for the integrity of evidence, had been compromised. Without a clear record of the evidence's handling, its credibility was in question. Judge Grayson, who had initially dismissed Zoe's objections as childish, now found himself grappling with the implications of her arguments. His earlier condescension had given way to frustration. He had underestimated her, and now the cracks in the prosecution's case were becoming undeniable. "Enough," Judge Grayson snapped, his patience wearing thin. "I will not tolerate these baseless objections." Zoe stood her ground. "Your Honor, I am merely seeking clarity and ensuring that justice is served. If the evidence is flawed, it is my duty to point it out." As the session adjourned, Zoe returned to her seat, her mind racing with the developments. She knew that the prosecution would attempt to rectify the issues she had highlighted. However, the damage had been done. The foundation of their case had been shaken. As the courtroom emptied, Zoe felt a surge of determination. She had taken a significant step toward justice. But she knew the battle was far from over. The prosecution would regroup and the trial would continue. However, Zoe was ready. She had proven that she was more than just a teenager. She was a formidable force in the pursuit of justice. Flashback. Zoe was no ordinary teenager. At the age of 8, she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her eyes fixed on her mother, Denise Martin, as she meticulously reviewed legal documents. Denise, a dedicated paralegal, often worked late into the night, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. Zoe admired her mother's unwavering commitment to justice, especially in cases involving wrongful convictions. One evening, Zoe asked, "Mom, why do you work so hard on these cases?" Denise paused, her eyes meeting Zoe's with a gentle smile. "Because, sweetheart, everyone deserves a fair chance. The law is powerful, but it must be wielded with integrity." These words resonated deeply with Zoe, planting the seeds of her own aspirations. As Zoe grew older, she became acutely aware of the systemic challenges her mother faced in the legal field. Denise often recounted instances where her expertise was overlooked and her contributions diminished solely because of her race. She shared stories of colleagues questioning her qualifications and dismissing her insights, experiences that highlighted the pervasive nature of institutional racism in the legal profession. These narratives fueled Zoe's determination to challenge the status quo. She was not just fighting for her own future, but for her mother's recognition and the acknowledgement of the countless Black professionals whose talents had been marginalized. Denise's journey was fraught with obstacles. Despite her extensive experience and dedication, she often found herself passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified individuals. Her insights were frequently dismissed in meetings, and her contributions overshadowed by her peers. These experiences were a stark reminder of the systemic barriers that Black professionals, especially women, faced in the legal field. Yet, Denise remained steadfast. She mentored young Black paralegals, imparting her knowledge and resilience, ensuring that the next generation would be better equipped to navigate and dismantle the barriers she had encountered. Zoe's resolve was unwavering. She immersed herself in legal studies, often staying up late into the night, poring over case files and legal texts. Her mother, though proud, expressed concern. "Zoe, the world isn't always kind to people who look like us," Denise cautioned. Zoe responded with a determined smile. "I know, Mom. but I'm going to change that." The courtroom was tense as Zoe Martin stood to cross-examine the forensic expert who had analyzed the fingerprints found on the stolen artwork. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the gravity of the moment. "Dr. Harris," Zoe began, "can you confirm that the standard protocol for fingerprint analysis was followed during your examination?" Dr. Harris hesitated, then replied, "Yes, the standard procedures were adhered to." Zoe pressed further, "Are you aware that the protocol requires a double-blind analysis to prevent any bias?" Dr. Harris shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware of that requirement." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Zoe had just exposed a significant flaw in the prosecution's evidence. "Without a double-blind analysis," Zoe continued, "isn't it possible that the results could be influenced by prior knowledge of the case?" Dr. Harris stammered, "Well, yes, it's possible." Zoe turned to the jury, her voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, if the forensic analysis wasn't conducted properly, how can we trust its findings?" Judge Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence beginning to waver. As the trial progressed, Zoe's meticulous attention to detail uncovered another critical piece of evidence. She had been reviewing the case files late into the night when she stumbled upon a mention of a phone recording from Officer Daniels, one of the officers involved in her arrest. The recording had not been submitted as evidence. The next day, Zoe stood before the court, holding up a USB drive. "Your Honor, I request that this recording be admitted into evidence." Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. "And what is this?" "It's a recording from Officer Daniels' phone," Zoe explained. "It contains a conversation that was not disclosed to the defense." The prosecutor, Raymond Douglas, objected. "Your Honor, this is new evidence. We haven't had a chance to review it." Zoe countered, "The prosecution had ample time to disclose all evidence. The failure to do so is a violation of my rights." After a brief recess, Judge Grayson reluctantly agreed to admit the recording. As it played, the courtroom listened intently to Officer Daniels discussing a suspect who was notably not black. This revelation cast doubt on the initial assumptions about Zoe's involvement. As Zoe continued to dismantle the prosecution's case, Judge Grayson's attitude began to shift. His earlier dismissiveness was replaced by a grudging respect for her intellect and determination. During a recess, Judge Grayson approached Zoe. "I must admit, Ms. Martin, your understanding of the law is impressive." Zoe smiled modestly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I believe in justice." Grayson nodded. "Just be careful. The system isn't always as fair as we'd like it to be." Zoe's resolve strengthened. She was not just fighting for her freedom, she was challenging a system that had long been biased against people who looked like her. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as Zoe Martin prepared to deliver her closing argument. Her earlier revelations had already cast significant doubt on the prosecution's case, but she knew this final piece would be the game changer. Standing before the jury, Zoe addressed them with unwavering confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence presented thus far has been riddled with inconsistencies and oversights, but the truth is clear. The person seen on the surveillance footage was not me, it was another individual, a white male who has been involved in a series of art thefts in this area." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The jury exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. "Furthermore," Zoe continued, "I have in my possession a recorded statement from the true thief. A confession that was conveniently ignored by the prosecution." With a deliberate motion, she produced the recording and handed it to the court clerk. The courtroom fell silent as the clerk played the confession aloud. In the recording, the thief detailed his involvement in the art thefts, including the specific incident for which Zoe had been accused. He described how he had meticulously planned the heist, ensuring that all evidence pointed towards Zoe, knowing that the authorities would be quick to arrest a young black woman with a criminal record. As the confession concluded, Zoe addressed the jury once more. This confession was available to the prosecution from the beginning, yet they chose to disregard it, opting instead to pursue a narrative that fit their preconceived notions. She turned to face the prosecutor, Raymond Douglas. "Why was this evidence withheld? Why was the truth ignored in favor of a convenient lie?" Douglas remained silent, his face flushed with embarrassment. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the jury processed the implications of Zoe's revelations. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as Judge Marcus Grayson prepared to deliver his verdict. The jury had deliberated for hours, and the weight of their decision was evident on their faces. Zoe Martin stood at the defense table, her heart pounding, her mother Denise seated beside her, holding her hand. Judge Grayson cleared his throat and addressed the court. After careful consideration of the evidence presented and the arguments made, I find that the prosecution has failed to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Therefore, the case is dismissed, and the jury is instructed to render a verdict of not guilty. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Zoe's eyes met her mother's, and they shared a moment of silent understanding. The battle was over, but the war against systemic injustice was just beginning. As Zoe exited the courthouse, the weight of her victory began to sink in. A crowd had gathered outside, a mix of supporters and onlookers, all eager to witness the outcome of the high-profile case. News cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the evening news. A reporter approached Zoe, microphone in hand. "Ms. Martin, how does it feel to be exonerated?" Zoe smiled, her voice steady. "It's a relief, but it's also a call to action. This case isn't just about me. It's about the countless others who have been wrongfully accused and convicted. We need to address the flaws in our justice system." Her words resonated with many. The media coverage that followed highlighted how a teenager had exposed the flaws in a corrupt system, sparking discussions about reform and accountability. Back in his chambers, Judge Grayson sat alone, reflecting on the trial. He had been skeptical of Zoe from the start, dismissing her as just another naive teenager. But her intelligence, determination, and unwavering commitment to justice had forced him to confront his own biases. Grayson leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had seen many cases in his career, but this one had left an indelible mark on him. He realized that he had underestimated Zoe, and in doing so, he had underestimated the power of truth and resilience. As Zoe and her mother walked to their car, the weight of the day began to settle in. Zoe had been exonerated, but she knew that her journey was far from over. She had seen firsthand the flaws in the justice system and was determined to be a part of the change. Denise looked at her daughter, pride evident in her eyes. "You did it, Zoe. I'm so proud of you." Zoe smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. "This is just the beginning, Mom. There's so much more to be done." As they drove away, Zoe gazed out the window, her mind racing with possibilities. She had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and now, more than ever, she was committed to that path. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. Zoe's story was a testament to resilience and the power of truth. Her fight had not only secured her freedom, but had also sparked a movement toward a more just society. As she continued her journey, she knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but with unwavering determination, she was ready to face it.